after a long delay, very happy to say I'm back with Ron Thomson, who I'm convinced is one of the most knowledgeable people around on African wildlife. And Ron, I've got the greatest respect for your fearless approach to dealing with some very tricky problems, and your forthright but well-researched approach to dealing with these problems. So thanks for being back to talk about hunting and wildlife.
My pleasure.
Ron, I just want to kick off. I know we've discussed, it has been discussed before, but what really sparked the anti-hunting debate and a worldwide furor was the shooting of Cecil the lion on the edge of Hwange Game Reserve, must be 3 or 4 years ago. And I just want to give you a chance to explain exactly what happened there.
Well, it's not just a question of what happened there. It's what was behind it and the motivations of the people who conjured up that story, because the story is based very heavily upon one huge lie, but it is laced with lies right throughout, and it's difficult to explain the thing and the whole incident in its full dimensions unless you know the behavior of lions, because that comes into it very greatly. So let me start off by saying, yes, Cecil was shot there. It did cause a big furore. Why am I not concerned about the furore as it stands? Because it's nonsense. It's all a lie. And that doesn't surprise me, because your animal writers can do nothing else but tell lies. It's the way they make money. And animal rightism is the biggest confidence industry the world has ever known. It is also the greatest international criminal element that we've got in the world anywhere. So let's start off by saying, let me tell you something about lions. Lions live in prides, which number variously from 1 to half a dozen females normally. 3 or 4 is about normal. And you can have 1 or 2 males. When you've got 1 or 2 males in a pride, the one is always dominant. And when they have cubs, the average number of cubs, I think, is about 4. But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of their first year, normally half of those cubs have died. Once they get over the first year, things get a little bit better for them. But also, everybody seems to think that the females do all the killing. The females do all sorts of killings, yes, but so do the males. But the males can handle big animals like buffalo bulls and giraffe bulls and things like that much better than the females can, because they've got more oomph, they've got more weight behind them. But the lions have also got a hierarchy, a rank structure within the prides. And number 1 boss man is the big dominant male, comes the second one, then the bigger females, then all the females, then the bigger cubs, and it goes right down to the little cubs when they start eating meat. So right from the beginning, those little cubs have to compete with big lions for their food. And when a big lion has a full meal, a big lioness has a full meal, the killers in the pride are then satisfied with their food. And they won't go out and kill another animal until they feel the need, until they're hungry again. And if the babies haven't had enough to eat, that's just tough luck. And this is why the mortality is so high in the first year. But then let's take it from there, in that they start growing up. The females have cubs. The gestation period is only about 3 months. So if they lose a set of cubs, very quickly they come into estrus again. They have another lot of cubs. So they're very prolific, very prolific. And you remember, you've got 3 or 4 or more lionesses in a pride, so the numbers of babies in a pride can be very large. And if you're living in a habitat where your prey animals are big, then most of your pride will stay alive and they'll be fat and happy. Where the food isn't quite so big, the prides tend to be smaller because your food amounts are smaller. But whatever the case is, however many cubs are reared by a pride in a year or two is the thing that determines what happens, one of the most important factors in their cycle, in their living cycle. And that is at the age of about, let's say, 22 months, let's call it 2 years, around about that time, your young male lions are bigger than their mothers at the shoulder. They grow very quickly. You're not nearly as big as the males. And of course, even compared to their mothers, they don't have the same oomph that the females have because they are still young and timid. But what happens at about 22 to 24 months of age is that they are kicked out of their pride by the dominant adults, male and female. Whether this is caused by them sniffing after a female that comes into oestrus and the female objects or the male objects, I don't know. And I'm not even going to try and pretend that I do know that. But what I can tell you is that those young lions, young male lions just a little bit bigger than their mothers, are evicted from the pride and they're chased away by the lionesses and by the big males. And they then have to go and leave the area, the pride, and they have to go and make a living themselves. Remember, they've never killed anything, but cats are funny things and lions are cats. And once if you put a rat in the middle of your sitting room and you've got a pet cat there, whether it has killed a rat or not before, that cat will be on that rat and it will kill it. Absolutely instinctively. Lions are much the same. If they're hungry and they're out and they see an animal walking around the bush, they will stalk it and they will kill it. And we have discovered, for example, with the captive lion breeding industry in South Africa, that a lion of 5, 6, 7 years old, if you take it and dump it into an area where there is game, if it's fenced off and you put the lion out there on its own, within minutes sometimes, they have made a kill, and they've never done it before in their lives before. And there's a big hoo-ha going on about the fact that captive bred lions have got no conservation value whatsoever. That's absolute rubbish. You can take, and we have done this, you can take a male and 4 females, put them in an area, in a fenced area where there's lots of game, and they immediately start killing for themselves. You don't have to kill for them. They immediately kill for themselves and they feed themselves, they breed, they have babies. And the first major exercise we did on this, I think in the last 3 or 4 years, that those 4 females have had something like 35 cubs altogether in the wild. So captive bred lions are in fact the best thing that could have happened, because wherever lions are being killed by the Maasai warriors or if they've been poisoned or whatever, if governments and people want lions back, all they have to do is to get a breeding unit of captive bred lions and put them there and they're off and then got no more problems. The other thing about this is that lions live in home ranges which become their territories. The adults become their territories. A home range is an area where an animal gets all its living needs, where it gets its food and its water, and it can stay alive. That's what a home range is. It's much like the suburb in which you live in a city. You've got supermarkets you go to get your food, and you can go to a bar and get your beers or whatever it is, but you can buy everything that you want, your fuel for your vehicles, everything in one area. And you don't leave that area because you don't have to. It's all there. Well, wild animals do the same thing. Lions do the same thing. When they are in a home range of their own, they stay in there because there are animals to hunt and to eat, and there's water to drink, etc. The only problem is that lions are very aggressive and, of course, very dangerous, not just to human beings, but to lions as well. I think more lions are killed by lions than any other thing. And when these young lions are kicked out of the pride, the adults, their parents, chase them right out of their home range. Right, because the home range, once you've got a pride established, their home range becomes their territory. And a territory has got everything to do with breeding. Home ranges for living, territories are for breeding. But territories can become, home ranges can become territories as well. But now these young lions are kicked out. The only place they know is their own home range, their own territory. And they've got to get out of the way of those big lions, their mummies and daddies, because they're going to be killed. So they have to move out, and they've got to find home ranges of their own. They don't have to worry so much about territories because they're still too young to breed. Or rather, they're too young to hold down a pride. Now, they have a lot of strife because wherever they go, when they leave their parental home range and territory, they move into other lions' territories, and the other lions see them as competitors. So the other lions also chase them. Wherever these young lions go, they're chased from pillar to post, and they're killed and eaten by other lions, or they're killed and maimed. And if they're maimed, they can't kill properly, so they die of starvation. There are all these different problems that the young lions have to contend with when they're on their own. But they are very resilient. They seem to survive a lot of that, but I suspect that there is quite large mortality in the first few years when they are independent. Now, a lion of 3 years old has got quite a respectable mane, so much so that people not in the know would say that it's worthy of being hunted, that the skin and the trophy and everything is worthwhile. But in actual fact, there's a very big difference between a 3-year-old lion and a 6- and 7-year-old lion. A 6- and 7-year-old lion is twice the size of a 3-year-old lion. So you may go out. I've shot a number of 3-year-old lions, for example, and younger, which have been killing stock. They go on into the tribal areas up in Rhodesia, and they were killing cattle. I had to go out and shoot them, or on European farms and things. But a 3-year-old lion, although it looks good, when you have shot a really big lion, you realize how small they are. And I've only shot 2 really dominant males, which as adults have been kicked out of the pride by other dominant males. And the difference between those animals and the normal ones that I shot, most of the lions that I've shot, and there are quite a number of them, are actually half-grown animals, if you like. They're independent, and they're big and fearsome animals, but they're nowhere near the size of the 6- and 7-year-olds. So you've got a situation developing here where these young lions that are kicked out of the prides are known as nomads. They're young nomads or vagrants. Nomad is the normal term they use. When they get 6- or 7-year-old, they are now starting to reach the size of a mature male lion that is the dominant male in a pride. And from 6 and 7 years on, the young lions, they often make coalitions between 1 or 2 big youngsters, and they challenge these big males, and they start scrapping with the big males who are in possession of a pride and in possession of a home range and in possession of a territory. And the young males, these 6, 7 years old, although they're the same size, don't have the experience that these older animals have. But they have huge fights with these lions, and the purpose of them fighting is for these young lions to get a pride, and they will go to all sorts of measures to be able to get a pride. Now, I can now bring in Cecil's history. Cecil came to the notice of some research people of the University of Oxford who were working in Hwange from 1999 onwards, and they were doing research on male lions in Hwange. So I think it was 2008, Cecil and what was presumed to be his brother were darted, and they had radio collars put around their necks that had sent out GPS signals every 2 hours. These were bounced off satellites high up in the heavens, and they came back and recorded. They recorded exactly where each lion was every 2 hours. And Cecil, to the day he died, which was in 2015, every 2 hours had his locality logged by these scientists. And Cecil and his brother had a scrap, I think about 2009 it was, sometime round about then. I've got the figures here, but I'm not going to read them because it's not really important. They managed to gain a pride, and the two of them took over the pride for a very short space of time. Remember, they're still youngsters and inexperienced, although very big at that stage. And of course, their manes are then fully grown, and they're really magnificent looking animals. Anyway, they had this pride they owned this pride for a year or two, something like that, not very long. And another 2 young males came in and duffed them up, and they took over the pride. And Cecil's brother was killed. Cecil was killed in the fighting that took place in 2008. 2009, Cecil managed to take over a pride on his own, and that lasted for a couple of years. Then 2 young males came in and kicked him out. The same procedure that had happened, that he had done before. And what happened was that Cecil and his brother killed the male lion. No, Cecil's brother was killed. And the male lion that was in charge of the pride had been very badly damaged in the fighting. And he was put down by the game rangers in Hwange because he was so badly hurt. And somewhere along the line, Cecil went off and he got his own pride. Then he was kicked out of his pride by 2 young males, and he went off down to the east of Hwange National Park. And the other lions took over the pride that he had been kicked out of. Then Cecil joined up with another young male, which has been called Jericho. You know, when you start adding names to lions and elephants and things, it's difficult for the general public to understand that they can be shot by a hunter. How can you shoot George or Harry or whatever it is, or Cecil? It gives them some form of identity with the human race somehow. Anyway, Cecil and Jericho joined up. Cecil was the dominant of the two lions. I think he was a little bit older than Jericho, but they each contributed lionesses to the pride. They also had cubs together, and eventually they took over a home range and a territory at the top end of the Det Vlei in Hwange National Park. Now, Det Vlei runs down from the railway line, which is the northern or the northeastern boundary of the park, and it's not fenced or anything. It's just a demarcated line, a railway line. Excuse me. And it runs right down the Det Vlei. Now, the Det Vlei is in a very big teak forest, and there's a narrow drainage line that runs down probably a couple of 100 meters wide, runs down for about 10 miles away from the railway line. And then it swings across into Ngweshlepan, which is a borehole game water supply. At Kennedy, there are 2 boreholes which pump water up to the surface, one by a windmill, one by a diesel pump. But there's 2 water holes there. And the pride established itself between these 2 water holes. Now, that went on very well. The cubs were born and everything. And then as happens, if you just add up the years, you find out that Cecil in 2015 was 13 years old. So this brings us to another issue we have to understand, and that is that lions normally live to about 12 years old. In some places, they say in Kruger, some lions have reached 15 years old. I think that is very unusual. But with the bovine TB that the lions have in Kruger, I'm advised by good authority that very few lions exceed the age of 10 years in Kruger now because of the disease. But Hwange, in Hwange, there is no bovine TB, and I think the lions probably live a normal length of time. And a normal length of time, when you take all the fighting and everything that takes place, is about 12 years. And a lion that is 12 years old is a male lion, is an old lion. Now, what does this mean in terms of the hunting and the management of lions? It means a whole lot. And in trying to get this message over to the non-believers and the people who think that everything must live and never die, I conjured up a little trick of mine where I work out whatever species you want to hunt, whatever species you want to know more about. You work out what its normal average lifespan is. Now, an average lifespan for a lion is 12 years. So if you divide those 12 years into three what I call life quarters, you end up with 4 life quarters, each one of 3 years old. Now, the first life quarter takes the lion to 3 years old. Now, it's grown up with its parents. It's been kicked out of the pride. It's learned now to be able to live on its own. Its friends or its brothers and sisters that have been unable to match it have died. But at the first life quarter, you've got lions of 3 years old. But they've still got a lot of growing to do and a lot of growing up to do and getting a lot of experience. Their second life quarter takes them up to 6 years. At 6 years, they're twice the size they were when they were 3 years old. And they are then reaching the stage where they want to get in and get a pride of their own. So their third life quarter is between 6 and 9 years old. And that is when most of the scrapping and the fighting goes on and most of the breeding goes on in that third life quarter. Once you get through that third life quarter with lions, it's about 9 years. Once you get into that stage, you end up with your bigger lions holding the fort. Like Cecil, he was a very big lion and he held the fort here for a few more years. But these lions are becoming senile now. And they're being duffed up by all these youngsters who are coming up underneath them, and they all want to take over the prides. So they have a tough time holding down their pride position. And at the end of their 4th year, when senility really comes on the scene, then in their 4th life quarter, then after 12, and that is when young lions can come in and duff them up and kick them out. Now, this is what, in my opinion, happened to Cecil. Cecil was 13 years old when he was shot by a hunter. So he had passed his life or sell by due date time, and he was ready to go at 12 years old, at 13 years old. And what happened was that he was kicked out of his pride. People are not prepared to say who kicked him out of his pride, but Jericho took over his pride. And it seems to me that Jericho, growing up as a slightly younger animal and living with a slightly older animal, I think that Jericho took the bull by the horns and chased Cecil away. Cecil then was forced then to leave his home range areas and his territory in the Det Vlei. And he was chased out by Jericho. Jericho took over the pride totally. And what happened then was that Cecil then became an adult nomad. You got juvenile nomads being kicked out at about 2 years old, and then right through until they get their own pride, they're all nomads. They just get bigger and bigger and older and older. When Cecil was kicked out, there was no chance at all that he could have found a new home range of his own, and no chance at all that he could at that age get another pride under him. So he moved out of the game reserve. And the reason he moved out, because if he stayed in the game reserve, all the territorial males in creation would have been after his hide. Even the younger nomads would have been after him, because he was then occupying land that other lions could occupy. And the other lions didn't like being ousted. So he moved right out of the game reserve, and he moved onto Antoinette Game Ranch, the bottom boundary of which was the railway line that marked the top end of Cecil's old territory. And he was actually, we found out 3 or 4 months after Cecil had been shot and after the furore had ripped through the world, the Oxford research people finally admitted that they knew, because he had a collar around his neck. For 3 or 4 months, Cecil had been living outside the game reserve on Antoinette. So, and this is what all old nomads do. They get away from the problem. The problem is where all the big lions are, where the territories are, where the younger lions are coming in and duffing them up. They go and find a place where it's nice and quiet, where they've probably got cows and donkeys and things to eat, or cattle, or they end up on a game ranch where they can eat the game. Or if they're going into a place like Antoinette, when the owner of Antoinette saw Cecil the lion there, he said, "This is a beautiful lion. I'm putting him on the market now. I'm going to go and hire somebody from over the world, over the seas, to come and shoot this lion, because this is how I make my money." Because the guy who owned Antoinette was a game ranch owner, and that was his business. And this lion was a gift from heaven for him. So he started feeding Cecil the lion on Antoinette, much to a lot of people's chagrin and upset. But Cecil was no longer part of the lion population inside Hwange at that time. Now he was cited as being the greatest lion since bubblegum. That people were coming from all over the world, especially to see Cecil the lion, because he was such a magnificent animal. That's absolutely humbug. It's rubbish. And Cecil only had about 1 tourist season there, that is 6 months, to get his notoriety or to get his famousness, to become famous as a lion. And in that one season, 1 tourist season, nowhere did he become a world-renowned lion. This was the propaganda put out by the animal rights people. Now what happened then was that Cecil, the owner of the ranch, got the farmer, who was the dentist, who came and shot Cecil with a bow and arrow. He contacted him and said, because this guy Palmer had said, "I'm looking for a big lion, and I want the big lion. So let me know when he comes." When he came, he was told, "The lion is on the ranch now. It's left the park. It's now a nomad on my ranch. I've got a permit to come. You can get a permit and whatever. Come and shoot it. If you want it, book it now. It's going to cost you so much money," which was, I don't know what it was, $45,000 or $50,000, something like that, which is what these lions are worth. But he was a magnificent lion. There's no doubt about that. But to say that he held the prize genes, the lion genes, that would benefit the whole of the lions in Hwange National Park is absolute rubbish, total rubbish. But anyway, what happened was that set up a hide. He came, they were feeding him on elephant meat. When the guy came here, he got into the hide. The lion came after dark. He shot it with a bow and arrow. A lot of people will query that. Why did he shoot it at night? All sorts of these problems, which I'm not going to get into because it doesn't affect my story. Mm-hmm. But he shot him and wounded him. And he was a very accomplished bowman. But nevertheless, the thing, Cecil ran off into the night. Now, they could have followed him with a torch and found it and shot it with a rifle, I suppose, but they didn't. Rightly or wrongly, they didn't. The story was that they found him 48 hours later. badly wounded and miles away from where he was, that is rubbish too. They found him by 9 o'clock the next morning. They had gone out, they found him, he was still alive, and the guy put a second arrow into it, killing him. They then brought the lion back and they skinned it and they prepared it for taxidermy. Now that means, which you will know, but maybe your viewers won't, that means taking the skin off, taking the paws off with the skin on, and then you skin the paws inside out so that all the outside, the pads and everything are on there, nothing on the inside remains, and they do the same with the head. The eyelids from the inside are carefully skinned out, and as are the gums and the ears and everything. The ears are very difficult to sort out, but the whole thing is that to do that, once you have opened him up, and once you have taken the skin off and you cut him off at the paws, so because then you can sit with the whole skin and the paws there, and you can use one paw at a time to skin it for the taxidermist. You do the same thing with the head. And then you've got a carcass lying there with no head, no skin, no paws. What are you going to do with the carcass? Any lions that I've ever shot and skinned, I've taken it out into the bush and I've dumped it somewhere nice and easy where the vultures can find it, and the vultures come down and land on it and the vultures eat it. So the whole carcass is not wasted. And that is what they did with Cecil. But now we had a gentleman in Zimbabwe called Johnny Rodriguez. Johnny Rodriguez was an animal rightist. He had his own family animal rights business there called the I forget what it was called now, but it was an animal rights organization. And he was lamenting the fact that he'd been running this organization for 35 years, that he had never had enough money to run it properly, etc. And I think he got a bit of tutoring from some of your international animal rights people on this kind of issue. You want to make money, this is how you make money. So he had been into Hwange several times, and he'd seen Cecil, and he had photographed Cecil, and he was impressed with Cecil, and he was infatuated with Cecil, as were a number of other people, no doubt. But the other people don't count. So anyway, the next thing we know is he goes into Hwange to go and do some more photographing of Cecil, and the staff there tell you, oh, Cecil's gone. He became a nomad, and he's been shot by an American with a bow and arrow. He blew his top there, and he decided he was going to publish all this in the newspapers and everything, which he did. And the questions were raised, but Cecil was part of a pride. How come Cecil was shot on your farm when his pride is in the game reserve somewhere? How did you get him onto your farm? So he conjured up the story that Palmer from Canada and his PH went into the game reserve at night with a wildebeest, a dead wildebeest. They tied it up behind the vehicle and they dragged it out in front of Cecil's pride, and Cecil alone left the pride and followed him onto Antoinette. And that is how Cecil got alone on Antoinette. And that is absolute hogwash. You have to say then, why didn't Jericho also follow? Why didn't all the lionesses follow? They're all hungry. Why didn't all the hungry cubs follow? But Cecil was the animal they wanted, and Cecil did it all on his own. It's absolute rubbish. Anyway, all these stories go. Then the next story is that somebody had saw the vultures and went over to where the vultures were, and they saw this carcass of a lion there without a head. So the story, Rodriguez got the story, he said, and all this guy, this dentist from America all he wanted was the lion's head. They cut its head off and then chucked the body away. He didn't even know that there was no skin on the body or anything. He knew nothing about it. But that was a story that the public were able to swallow. And that was a story that came out about Cecil the lion. It is so full of rubbish, it's unbelievable. One of the big things they said about Cecil was that he had a gradier collar around his neck. Yes, he did. And therefore he was being investigated, he was being researched by these scientists from Oxford University? Yes, he was. But between 1999 and 2015, when Cecil was shot, the scientists had collared 62 other big male lions in Hwange, and that they had followed these lions' movements every 2 hours. Every one had a different signal for the collar, and every lion they were able to move them all. Their purpose in their research was to find out what happens to big male lions once they have become deposed. So everyone says, well, the hunters shoot them. The hunters don't shoot them, because the hunters are not allowed to shoot in the national park. But now, this is where you have to understand the biology and the behavior patterns of lions with the nomad situation quite clearly, to understand the truth of this part of the story. Is that of the 62 lions that had been collared by the scientists, 34 of them had died since 1999. And every single one of those deaths, its nature of the death, because they were able to track the lion with its collar, they knew why it had died. And so the proof of the pudding of this research on any one lion is to find out how it had died, because that gave the scientists the information they were looking for. What happens to lions when they get old and they die? And how do they die? And Cecil was one of 62. There was nothing special about him at all, nothing. And of the 34 lions that had died since being collared, 24 of them had been collared on private land north of the railway line along Hwange's boundary, on private land, and they've been shot by hunters, exactly as Cecil had been shot. So there was no difference between Cecil and all these other 24 lions that had been killed during this period. So that is the story, the real story of Cecil the lion. And if you can understand that story and read between the lines and see the truth in this, I may have not got it exactly right here, there, but that is the truth of the story. But that story was fabricated by Johnny Rodriguez. He then got onto the press. The press then put it out. The press got all these stories. And in the press, in British newspapers, there's a very clear indication there that it said Johnny Rodriguez, who's been struggling in Zimbabwe to help the conservation issue and stop the killing by hunters of lions and other animals in Rhodesia, he's been trying for 35 years to get the Rhodesian government to change its stance. And he hasn't been able to do this. But now with Cecil, now suddenly the donation buttons had been pressed, and he was getting more money than he knew how to handle, coming in from all over the world. And this is how Cecil got his notoriety. And then, of course, the Americans took over the whole Cecil story. You had all these big parades and everything with thousands of people in Washington, D.C. You've probably seen it on the television. Cecil the Lion Day. And now they've got a thing where they talk about Cecil the Lion factor. I don't know what this factor is, but everybody says Cecil's a special. They say that Cecil was the problem that started the controversy over trophy hunting. If trophy hunting wasn't allowed, nobody would have shot Cecil. And that is where the whole anti-trophy hunting thing started. And we've got to understand how these things start. And it was started with the international animal rights movements who together comprise organized crime throughout the world. They are criminals. If you look at the American RICO Act, for example, this explains it very clearly. The American RICO Act was designed to stop racketeering and the mafia activities, mafia crime in the United States. And they say if you tell a lie or do something dependent upon a lie, and you then go to the public and say to the public, listen, this thing is a bad thing that I'm telling you about, but I will make sure that you are not affected. if you pay me money, I will come stand in the way and I will get an organization to stop that crime being committed again. Meanwhile, the crime is the telling of the lie. And the public then put their hands in their pockets, get their pennies out, and they put them in. I heard the other day that in America and Europe, that combined, the animal rights organizations are making something like $34 billion a year from donations for these kind of lies that are being told. Now, the American RICO Act says if you tell a lie and then make money out of that lie, what you have done then is you have committed a fraud. Tell a lie, which is a fraud. Make money out of it is fraudulent. Okay? Then they say, if you do that a second time inside a period of 10 years, then that fraud becomes a racket. And racketeering in the United States is considered to be organized crime. Ipso facto, your animal rightists are organized crime criminals. They are the modern mafioso. And I think this is the image that I would like to get to project into the world so that we can stop these bloody people from harassing those of us who want to manage our wildlife properly and want to hunt it legally. Ron, so that is Cecil's contribution to the whole scene.
Ron, just following on a bit, there's been another rumpus fairly recently in Botswana. There have been some big elephant bulls shot there. And this has caused another international uproar. Do you know anything about what actually happened there? And have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, just at the moment, I'm in the middle of producing two films, or two parts to one film, which is the management of, it's called The Management of Southern Africa's Endangered Elephants, because they're not endangered. And we have just completed the Hwange National Park part of it. And we've filmed the whole thing. We have been through Kruger, we've been through Botswana. And what we're looking at, we're not doing Walt Disney films about elephants. We're making a film which catalogs and provides visual evidence of the impact that elephants are having on their habitats. And relating that to the numbers of elephants that are available and just how the management has not been done over the past 60 years. And what we have found is absolutely horrific. In a nutshell, Hwange National Park has got an elephant carrying capacity of, according to my calculation, 3,500 plus or minus 500. And that was determined when the habitat was still healthy in the 1950s. Today, there are 34,000, the staff in Kruger claim that they have got 34,000. Up until this year, I've always heard that the Kruger Park have been saying that they've got 15,000 or 17,000 elephants and that they have stabilized in Kruger. That's rubbish. This year, for the first time, they've come up and said, we think we have got 34,000 elephants in Kruger. We have got people like Solomon Joubert, he used to be a director of Hwange National Park, and at one time, a large mammal scientist there. And I trust him explicitly in this. He has worked out various different ways that scientists have of enumerating these things. And he claims that there are 34,000 elephants in Kruger. Now, when you get to Botswana, you've got a totally different scene. Kruger has got an area that is fenced off and it's got no people living in it. And if you've got 34,000 elephants in Kruger, and if the carrying capacity is, as I say, 3,500, then you have got almost exactly 10 times too many elephants in Hwange National Park, 10 times too many. When you try to do the same sort of thing for Botswana, Botswana's situation is very different. Botswana has got tens of thousands of people living in the same areas that the elephants are living. There are blocks of land like Hwange National Park where there is nobody living in Hwange, but all around Hwange and all around the other places around the swamps and everywhere, you have got villages where people are living. And not only that, the elephants are moving from Botswana around the swampy area in Hwange up into, in the wet season, they move into southern Zambia, across the Zambezi. They move into southern Angola. They move into northeastern Namibia, and they move across into Hwange in western Matabeleland in Zimbabwe. And they take in largely the swamp area and all these other areas around the other countries, 5 countries involved. They're calling the area the Kaza Transfrontier Conservation Area. That is the Zambezi area altogether with the 5 countries. And those elephants are moving between these various, certain of them move up and they come back again, and dry season comes and they move out. All elephants have, most game animals in dry areas have certain things that force them to do things. At the height of the dry season, they have to come near water. Water is the principal factor. There's no water, they can't live there. When the rains come, water becomes a non-limiting factor. They then move out from that. It's like a big pulse. So they've got a home range, I'm not talking about territories, a home range where they have got enough food to stay alive during the dry season, for 6 months of the dry season. And then when the rains come, they disperse. Elephants are remarkable. One day you can see 1,000 elephants around your area. The next night, after a storm, poof, they're gone. And they're gone for the next 6 months. And then they come back again. And what is happening in the Botswana situation is that they're moving from the central core of their dry season home ranges, and then probably several cores there. And then when the rains come, they expand into these different areas all around. And because they comply with the definition for a home range, of a population. A population is defined as a group of animals of the same species that interact with each other on a daily basis, and which can interrupt each other on a daily basis, and which breed only within their own group. So what happens seasonally is your elephants come into these, obviously there are groups within the groups, and they have got their own little favorite place that they come to in the dry season. As soon as it rains, poof, they go out. So that the area that they occupy is occupied in the form of a pulse, in that it's constricted during the dry season, it expands during the rains. So if you can imagine your elephants doing this, this is one of the reasons that they have such a wide range in Botswana. Now, instead of just a few handfuls of elephants in that entire complex, it is one population. We call it a mega population. Unlike Kruger, which is an individual population, the numbers of elephants in that total 5-country area, all condensed around the Zambezi, the Hwange, and the Okavango swamps area. The last number I heard earlier on this year was 220,000 elephants in that area. That's incredible. Now, one of the big things when we went through, as I say, we went through it last October at the height of the dry season. And what we have discovered there is that, looking at the habitats, is that in the teak forests, elephants in Hwange live in teak forests. And I used to hunt crop raiders and buffalo bulls there on a regular basis when I was a young game ranger there in the early 1960s. And the understory in the teak forest is densely thick. The Bushmen call it sinanga. And they warn you that if you're hunting elephants or especially buffalo in the Senanga, you better watch it because it's so thick that you walk on top of them. That's how thick the understory gets. But the elephants do not eat teak. There are a number of things. The big Natal mahogany, they don't eat Natal mahoganies as well. So these trees are salient animals or salient groups of vegetation which the elephants avoid. So you can go into the teak forests of Chobe, and from the Chobe River looking up into the teak forest, you can see that the whole area is one big Kalahari sand dune that goes up hundreds of feet in the air. It's a big round thing like this, and it's covered in teak trees. The whole thing is covered in teak trees. But looking at it from a distance, or when you get up into it and you look at it close by, as you're looking through the area, it is underneath the teak trees is just bare ground. Now coming up towards Chobe, we pass through a small forest area where there is some very nice teak forest there. It's not magnificent teak forest, but it's untouched. The elephants don't go into it. And we've filmed the understory there at the height of the dry season, and it is thick. During the rains, of course, it thickens up because it reliefs and what have you, but there is lots and lots of plants in it. When you go to Chobe and the other places, the teak forests there it's just bare ground underneath. There is nothing for the elephants to eat, nothing. When we went down and we looked at the rivers on the big floodplain at Chobe, there's a big, very wide floodplain in the river where for years and years, the Kalahari sand has been blowing in there, mixing up with silt on the floods. And it is a very nice floodplain with very short lawn-like grass on the floodplain. And the elephants are down there, and I wonder what the hell they're eating. Because I had to look very carefully to see what they were eating. And what they were doing, whole herds of elephants, not just one here and one there, whole herds of elephants were going up, and with their front feet, they were kicking like this. Use my hand to show you here, kicking like that with their toenails into the ground and just digging out the roots of a couch-like grass and then eating them up. And that's what they were eating. There was nothing there from the floodplain for them to eat. And we saw 20, 30, 40, 50 elephants at a time on the floodplain. And when they came up and we followed them back into the teak forest, there's nothing for them to eat. They are eating trees, species of trees that I say they eat with long teeth because they don't like them. They don't like those trees at all. But they're eating them because there's nothing else. They have wiped out the riverine forest at Chobe almost entirely. There's less than 10% of it left. Or even less than that, less than 2% of it left. So you hear these people saying the elephant is an endangered species and that it is facing extinction. We've got to save every single elephant, and we must stop this hunting, and we must stop culling, and we must stop all this sort of thing. My advice to Hwange National Park is to cull 30,000 elephants. Otherwise, they're going to lose their entire biological diversity, and Kruger is going to become a desert. And I'll say that in front of anybody, and I'll prove my point. Botswana is something similar, but it's different. Because there are people living in there, if you shoot an animal, the carcass is eaten up immediately by the local people. The elephants are raiding their crops all the time. They're raiding their villages all the time. And they've got 220,000 in that area. I don't know what the carrying capacity is, but what I can tell you is that one part of the area there, Hwange National Park, in 1960, we assessed that the carrying capacity for Hwange was 2,500 elephant, or 1 elephant per 4 square miles, which just happens to be exactly the same as Kruger. So I think that the Botswana situation of elephant carrying capacity is very much the same issues in Kruger, but the habitats are totally different. Now, the big problem here is that a national park is not required to be an elephant farm where you look after elephants down to the last animal. It's supposed to be an area where you're looking after the entire spectrum of your species diversity. And every species of animal has its own habitat kind that it depends upon to stay alive. And in any game reserve, you have got one type of habitat lying on top of another one like this. And all these animals are going into this mixture and taking out of it those parts of the environment that are best suited to their species. Now, when the elephants get in, they eat everything. And when you look at Toby and these big, wide open, flat plains, we saw lots of elephant. We saw lots of buffalo. We saw a few hippo. I think we saw half a dozen giraffe that came out to have a drink on the edges. We saw about the same number of sable. I think 4 or 5 tsesebe. And 4 or 5 lechwe. And that was all. That was all. And baboons. That was all. So now there's this, and there are all sorts of stories I can tell you about what happened when Dr. Graham Child was there in 1965, how he catalogued things, and how by 1974 or 72, everything was gone. The whole Chobe forest was gone. The whole of the Botswana wildlife area has been so badly managed for the last 60 or 70 years that it's going to be a monumental shift to be able to get people to do what is right. I sympathize with them totally. They have had a president in the past who is animal rights orientated. He has taken his cue from people with lodges there who are animal rights themselves, who have said there's no point in cutting elephants in Botswana because the population is stabilized, everything is fine. It hasn't stabilized, but it may seem to have been stabilized. But the species diversity is down.
Ron, these 2 elephants that have recently been shot got a lot of attention because the one in particular was an exceptionally big bull. The anti-hunters point they're raising is that this affects the genetic quality going back into the elephant population because you're shooting these big bulls. What's your response to that?
Hogwash, absolute hogwash. We discussed Cecil just now and the 4 life quarters. Do that for elephants. Elephants have got a life expectancy of 60 years. So therefore, 1 life quarter for an elephant is 15 years. The first 15 years of an elephant's life, it grows up with it, and then it's kicked out of the herd by the cows. The cows actually push it out. And then it goes out. And what people don't understand about elephants is your elephant bulls and your elephant cows live 2 totally different lives. They live apart. The only time the bulls go to service the cows is when the cow comes in oestrus. Then a bull in musk goes into the herd and it serves the cow. Then it comes back and goes back to the bulls. And the bulls are very solitary animals. If you watch bull herds or even small bull groups, you'll see that they may seem to be together, but in actual fact, there's a good social distance between them, and because they fight like hell and they kill each other, they are very conscious of the fact that you don't upset a bull that is bigger than you are. So now your second life quarter bulls, that is between 15 and 30 years, are young bulls that are joining the bulls now. They've left their mothers, left the other herds, and those young bulls there, some of them may come into must earlier on, but the next lot, the 3rd life quarter bulls, are the ones that do all the breeding. They don't like these young bulls coming into must young. They don't like competition from these young upstarts. And so there's a lot of disciplining goes on between the 3rd life quarter and the 2nd life quarter bulls in a population. And when you know what to look at, when you look at a big bull herd, you can see it happening. I've got film I can show you this happening all the time. Once they're in their 3rd quarter, this is when the bulls all their life, you'll find baby elephants, when they're still tiny, still under their mother's legs, they're fighting with each other all the time. As they get up, they get little tusks, they're fighting with each other for no reason at all. You see the bulls, they do it all the time. As they're growing up, as they get into the end of their first life quarter, you'll find in the herd, they come together at the waterhole, they're fighting. What are they fighting for? Everyone say they're play fighting, but it becomes very earnest later on. And they're fighting for rank. And rank is one of the most important things in a bull herd in a population of elephants. The higher the rank they are, the more they come into must, the more they can go and serve the cows. And only a bull in must is allowed to go and serve the cows, because every bull in must, if one's coming up, they're fighting each other in their third life quarter all the time for the right to go and serve the cows. And when they're in their third life quarter, this is when they grow to their full size. This is when they get their rank structure has been sorted out. And this is when the ones with the best rank are the ones that come into must the most. And this is where all this fighting, this is what it all involves. This is what it's all about. As soon as they move from the third life quarter into the fourth life quarter, that is between the ages, the third life quarter is between 30 and 45 years old. Between 45 and 60 years old, 60 years is the end of their life virtually. You've got other things to come in, and that is that throughout their lives, elephants have only 6 sets of molar teeth. They've got their tusks, and they have got molar teeth. And these teeth come in from the back of the jaw, and they come through what I call a slotted jaw, and they grow forwards like that, and then they start chewing on the first lot of molars. And then the next lot of molars start growing in from the back, and they push the first lot of molars forward, better into position. The back molars are then visible. And then the next thing is another lot come in and push the second lot forward, and the front molars get worn out because they're in younger animals for one, so they're smaller. They're pushed out, and so now you've got 3 teeth in a row, but only one is ever operating efficiently, top and bottom on the jaw. The next lot comes in, the next lot comes in. And what happens is that during life, if you can imagine these teeth coming one after the other from behind, pushing them away to the front, they use the molars for chewing their sticks and everything, to chew the bark off the sticks. And that's all they're really used for, is chewing, their big chewing teeth. Now, when they reach their third life quarter, the last of these 6 molars comes into place. And what happens then is that's in their fourth life quarter, the last of the molars come into place. And then that elephant in its last 15 years of life is dependent upon that last set of molars to masticate its food. And the older it gets in there, the more does that single tooth break off, until eventually the teeth fall out and it's got no teeth left, and the elephant dies of starvation. That's virtually what happens.
What stage were these 2 bulls? Do you know?
No, but I would hazard a guess and say that they're fourth life quarter, because these tusks, these elephants, you've got to look at other examples. Kruger has got a very good system going. They've got a museum at Letaba where they show all these teeth going, and they show the tusks and everything. What they say is that when the elephant is down to its last set of teeth, it's then got surplus calcium being produced, because all his life has been producing calcium for his teeth. Now they no longer need it, and that calcium then goes into the tusks. So most of the tusk growth happens when the elephant is in its fourth life quarter.
Right.
Okay, but you can imagine some silly old man like me wanting to get his leg over with a nice lady at the bar at night, And a nice young rugby player comes in and he says, bugger off, old man, this is my scene now. That happens with the elephants too. And you find these very old bulls, they become thin because they're not masticating properly. They get old, so they become infirm. They lose weight. Their tusks get in the way. And these young bulls in the third, look, it's the difference between me. I'm 82. I wouldn't stand a chance against someone who's 45. Not a chance, a physical chance, not a chance. The same with your elephants. So it's all very well saying, I'm sure that those bulls have got these big tusks because they've got the best genes. In actual fact, it doesn't work that way, because they've passed on their genes long ago when they were in their third life quarter. And the fourth life quarter bulls are where you're getting your very big tuskers. Now, what has been happening in Kruger, which is very interesting in this regard, is that 20 or 30 years ago, they've got elephant tusks there that are 150 pounds, 120, 150 pounds in the museum from old elephants that have been well known in Kruger. And you see these massive big tusks, and then they take the dentition. You see, this is where Botswana is doing it right. Botswana, when they shoot an elephant there, the tusks come in and the bottom jaw comes in too. So the scientists can look at the bottom jaw, look at the dentition and say, this animal is so many years old. And they can tell them that from the dentition. And to my knowledge, this has not happened anywhere else before. But Botswana are doing it now, and they're doing exactly the right thing, because they, sooner or later, they probably don't know the answers yet, but sooner or later, with more and more of these bottom jaws coming in, they will start to understand better which animals are the ones carrying the heavy tusks. Now, what has happened, the interesting thing in Kruger is this, is that 20, 30 years ago, these very big bulls with magnificent teeth, tusks, they were dying when they were 57, 58, 59, 60 years old, right at the end of their expected lifespans. Today, you're not getting big tuskers like that anymore. You're getting good tuskers. There's some lovely tusk ivory there, but it's not the 100-pounder, the 150-pounder size. They're not getting that size anymore.
Right.
And what they're discovering is that the age from the dentition on the bottom jaw. Now, this Kruger scientist has been doing this for some time now. Is that currently there are very few bulls in Kruger National Park that are older than 50 years. And what is happening is, what I think is happening, and I'm hazarding a guess here, is that with them having 5 times too many elephants in Kruger for the habitat to support. And my concern is with the habitat, because that affects species diversity and the whole health of the game reserve. It's all to do with proper habitat management. Habitats are more important than the animals. But now when we look at this situation, we've got a situation here where bulls who are under 50, who are coming towards the end of their third life quarter, and in their life quarter, these are the ones that are doing the mating now. But remember, you've got 5 times as many elephants as you should have in Kruger National Park. That means you've got 5 times as many young bulls that are in fighting mode in the third quarter than ever you had before, when the population was down to the right levels. Now, instead of having these old bulls having to contest with one opponent, they've now got 5 opponents all at the same time. And I think that has affected it, because what is happening now, most certainly your third life quarter bulls are killing the older bulls in the third life quarter, and the younger bulls in the fourth life quarter. So I'm quite sure that those bulls that are those 100-pounders that are coming out of Botswana now are in their fourth life quarter. And those, because they're in their fourth life quarter, and because the third life quarter is when most of the mating takes place, they are surplus. Those big bulls are surplus to the elephant population.
Moving. Where do you think these have, Ron, do you have any idea where these elephant originated from? Do you think they are they Botswana homegrown, or have they moved from somewhere else, these bigger tuskers?
I've been watching this sort of thing for a very long time. A couple of years ago, Take Aim Safaris took a 120-pound elephant, a beautiful matched tusks, out of the edge of the Gonorrhea. I lived in the Gonorrhea there for 5.5 years. I was in charge of it for 5.5 years. And there was a big tusker there we knew as Kambaku. I saw him in the Nyamasekana Basin, and we're looking there at a game reserve. Gonorrhea is only 2,000 square miles. That's 1/4 the size of Hwange National Park. And we had game scouts, people and two visitors and everybody going through that game reserve all the time. And I saw this big bull. He weighed, I think he had 110 pounds or something like that. And I saw him once when I was first there. I never saw him again. And yet he was found in the park about 6 or 7 years later. He was darted and they put a collar on him. So he was there. And my impression, and I'm just talking about living with elephants for a long time, being in their company day in and day out for a long, long time. I have the feeling that these old bulls, when they start feeling their oats, when they start feeling too old, when they know that old age is coming on, I think they find a little pocket somewhere where they can live, where they've got their favorite foods. They don't have to walk great distances. Their ability to chew their food and thing is dropping off. I think those old bulls just find a place to go and live somewhere until they die. Certainly Kambaku, I don't know where he went to. They don't migrate. Elephants live. Elephants don't migrate. The story of is on their migration route is absolute rubbish. Their migration route is from their dry season home range to their wet season home range, and it's as I say, it's a pulse. They don't go from here to there and they ignore this. You still get elephants going through the dry season home range, and it's a migration is when a population leaves one area completely and goes somewhere else, like the ducks and geese leaving the Arctic, and they can't stay in the Arctic because of the ice and the snow. That is a migration. Elephants have a pulse, and they do this. This is what elephants do every year. So there's no migration. But those old bulls, and you very often find an askari with them, 1 or 2 younger bulls with them. I don't know the story there, but I know that it happens because I've seen it. Where you get 2 younger bulls, probably in their second life quarter, looking or being with the old bulls. What their purpose is, I don't know.
Ron, I'm going to thank you very much indeed for all that information. I just hope, like hell, there are enough people out there listening to make a difference, because there's no doubt that the biggest problem facing genuine conservationists in Africa, to my mind, is disinformation. It's just that too many people have been led to believe something that's totally incorrect. And while they might be well-intentioned, it's a very dangerous situation when you have a whole media campaign focused on achieving something that is actually going to be detrimental to African wildlife in the short, medium, and long term, and it's all based on ignorance. And not just ignorance. It's not just ignorance. Remember, the animal rightists are doing this to make money. Theirs is a criminal activity. They start off with fraud, and it becomes a racket, then it becomes organized crime, and they are in the organized crime racket. And
problem here is you've even got people like Prince William of the royal family in England who are kowtowing with people who are animal rights.
And Boris Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, she's heading.
Barack Obama.
It's back to this this whole virtue signaling syndrome where people love projecting themselves as being virtuous, and we see it in so many ways. I mean, I don't believe there would have been any furor about Cecil the lion if Cecil had been killed by a Maasai warrior or by anybody with a dark skin, but because it happened to be an affluent white American, there was international outrage. And this is the incipient racism that feeds into our system on a daily basis. But that's another story for another day. We deal with that in so many ways.
Well, get ready for it, because my recommendation for Kruger National Park is that they have to remove 7,000 elephants.
No.
6,000. Sorry, 30,000 elephants. 30,000 elephants. That's what Kruger have to reduce to save Kruger National Park from becoming a desert.
Well, then,
Botswana,
to my mind, Kruger's doomed because they're never going to do it. The political will is just not there. And that is because the world doesn't understand. They don't know what you know. They don't have any idea.
This is why we have people like you. You help us get it out. Now, if you look at Botswana, the problem's even worse in Botswana, where they claimed, and look, these figures that are quoted are often very ambiguous. I don't have much faith in the accuracy of these figures, but let's take them as a guide to what is. The guide to what is that Kruger National Park has got 34,000 elephants, plus or minus, maybe up to 40,000. It's a hell of a lot of elephants. The carrying capacity is 3,500. That's the important thing. If you go to Botswana, and this is where an even bigger problem arises, if you're looking at benchmarks for management, there are 3 levels of management. The first level is when you have got a population of animals that is very low in number, like the roan antelope in Kruger National Park. The management tactic to apply to the roan antelope and probably the sable antelope as well in Kruger is preservation management, where you protect them from all harm so that you can build them up in number. Your next one is maintenance management, which is when you've got animals that are at the carrying capacity of their habitat and they are breeding well. So there's no real problem with them. But the management strategy you have to apply there, management or conservation management there, is that you have to cull the annual increment every year. To keep them at that level, you must allow them to get more. Your next level is population reduction management, when you have got a population that is infinitely bigger than the carrying capacity of the habitat. And your first step on management there is to reduce the population, is to cut it in half by 50%. Think of Botswana and the surrounding country. If they've got 220,000 elephants there to save their national parks, just to save their national parks, as a first step, they're going to have to kill 110,000 elephants. Now, how are we going to get people to understand this when even the King of England doesn't understand it?
Well, I don't think, well, it's not the King. I don't think those people understand much, quite frankly, but that's another topic for another day.
This is what I'm trying to do now, is to get this common sense approach to wildlife management, to get it out into people's heads so they start thinking properly. If they don't accept my figures, then let's look at the figures and see how we come by them.
Ron, they won't even come to the debate because they'd be completely and utterly out of their depth in a debate based on the facts. But that's something we've got to try and tee up for our next talk, is to bring in somebody who does believe, who does have a different view to yours, and believes that we can continue as we are without reducing elephant or other populations. And that's something I'd very much like to do in the not too distant future. But for now, I'm just going to thank you very much for your time, and I hope we can just keep banging away. It's all we can do, Ron. If nobody's listening, they're not listening, but at least we tried.
Yep. We must keep trying.
Cheers, Ron.
Okay, cheers, Hannes.